Susan Taylor anchored the news at the major TV network affiliates for more than 3 decades. She anchored the news in Miami, Dallas, and Los Angeles. The last 16 years of her career were spent anchoring the evening newscasts at the NBC TV station in San Diego. During her career, Susan received numerous awards for her broadcasting work, including multiple Emmys and Press Club Awards. During her time in news media, Susan interviewed the likes of Nobel Peace Prize winner Elie Wiesel and poet laureate Maya Angelou. She's also been on the front lines covering major brush fires, riots, and political unrest. 8 years ago, Susan walked away from her TV career to join Scripps Health as the Director of External Affairs. Why she walked away is the subject of her keynote speech, which helps audiences navigate their own career change. Susan has been kind enough to join us today to discuss the importance of communication and media training in a world impacted by COVID-19. Susan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Why did you walk away from a very successful 30-plus year TV career?
I actually had no intention of walking away, but life is real interesting. It throws you these twists and turns along the way. And the cultural change began for me back in 2008. And it started with the phrase, "Have a nice surgery." Those were the last words that our son said to my dad before his open heart surgery at Scripps Memorial Hospital in La Jolla. It was very, very complicated open heart surgery. My dad ended up being in a coma for a little more than 2 months. And I spent tremendous amount of time walking the halls at Scripps of all hours of the day and night. And I was so impressed with the way that they took care of patients. And I thought a little cynically that my dad was getting all this great care because I happened to be on TV. And I realized after walking the halls at all hours of the day and night that everybody who walks through those doors gets treated the same way, with a smile and a hug and this profound sensitivity to the patients and their family. My dad came out of the coma, Scripps did everything right, and he lived another 7 years. But 8 years ago, actually, my son came to me when he was 12, and he said, "You know, Mom, I miss you. I don't like you working until midnight." And I was anchoring the 4, 4:35, 6, and 11 p.m. news. And I would go in and do the early shows in the afternoon, and then I would run home and have dinner with my husband and our son, and then I would race back to the station to anchor the 11 o'clock news. And so a couple of things happened at the same time. I was getting ready to negotiate a new long-term contract with NBC that would have kept me there until our son was out of high school. And I thought, how many more nights or afternoons am I not going to be able to spend with him if I accept this new offer? Two other things happened. My husband is from Montana, and we go up to Montana every summer to vacation. And I remember being there on a Wednesday night, very relaxed, overlooking a lake close to Glacier National Park, there with my husband and our son. And I looked around and I thought, how many more weeknights would I not have this if I accepted this new contract? We came back to San Diego and then went down to the Summer Pops. We were meeting some friends there in the evening, and it's a summer concert series that they have overlooking San Diego Bay. And so I said hello to the friends, was there from after I left the 6 o'clock news, came and stayed with them from 7 until 8, and then had to say goodbye. And I thought, how many more nights will I not be able to be with our friends if I accept this new contract? And I thought, I actually reached out to a mentor of mine, Howard Putnam. Howard used to be the CEO of Braniff Airlines, and I met him when I was anchoring the news in Dallas. And he had the very unenviable job of trying to save Braniff, and he had to take it into bankruptcy in order to do that. And I remember I was so impressed because he always made himself available to the media. He was always open and transparent, even though he had to deliver some very, very difficult news at the time. And Howard and I stayed in contact over the years, and he came and gave a speech actually in San Diego, and I met him for dinner, and he said to me, "How much longer are you going to keep doing this TV thing, working until midnight?" And I had never thought about anything else, because you think you have this very small set of marketable skills. And so given all those things, they all kind of came together at the same time, and I thought, if I don't make a change now, I might have some serious regrets down the road. And so now I'm at Scripps Health, and I'm the director of external affairs. At my core, I'm a storyteller. When I was in television, I would be telling stories about murders, fires, rapes, hurricanes, earthquakes. Now at Scripps, I'm still at my core a storyteller, but now I'm telling stories, patient stories featuring our phenomenal doctors, highlighting technology that is transforming the way healthcare is delivered.
With the increased use of virtual technology, more people are using platforms like Zoom and Skype to connect. How has communication changed, or has it changed?
Well, I think the delivery system has changed, but I don't think the messaging has changed, nor should it change. I work for Scripps Health. We're a healthcare provider. Because of COVID, we started implementing e-visits and video visits. We are now doing thousands of virtual visits with our doctors and patients every day. I've done a couple of e-visits. I've done a couple of virtual visits where I'm literally talking to the doctor like I'm talking to you. Uh, I think that that's going to stay even after this COVID crisis is gone. I think we're going to have all of these virtual meetings. I think that they will continue uh, long after the COVID crisis is gone. It's a lot easier. People in San Diego say they love it because we don't have to deal with the traffic. You can we're feeling more productive working from home where we don't have to get in the car and it takes 45 minutes to get to work. So I think a lot of this virtual stuff will continue even after COVID is done. And I think that that's a good thing. But I think you also need to become a real expert as to how this works. Whether you're on a Zoom meeting, Skype, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, you need to understand how it works. And so I tell people, please be really aware of your surroundings when you're doing these meetings. So for example, I always tell people, make sure that you have a background that is opposite of you. So for example, I have dark hair, so I put myself in front of a light background. You also want to make sure that the background is mostly solid color because you don't want a crowded background to be kind of distracting from the message that you are saying. I don't want you to give into style over substance, but I think the style that you have can actually enhance the substance of what you're saying. So if you have dark hair, you have a light colored background. If you have light colored hair, then put yourself against a dark colored background because it actually makes you stand out. And you want the audience to focus on this, particularly your eyes, because they are the window to the soul. And that's how people communicate with each other. Also, I tell people that it's when you're on a Zoom call and there's maybe 10 or 15 or 20 people, you're constantly looking around on the computer. You also, when you're making a really important statement, need to focus on where the camera is on the computer. So the camera right here is right there, and that's where I need to be looking at. If I want to look at you, which is what my tendency is, if you see when I look at you, I'm actually looking down. So when you have something really important to say, make sure that you are focused on where that camera is. I always like to think of the camera as the third person in the room. So when I was anchoring the news, I had a co-anchor. So I'll say that you're my co-anchor. So you're the second person in the room and you're always interacting with that person. But the third person in the room, I remember was the camera, the TV camera in front of us. And so you were looking and delivering the news to that camera. And I always thought of that as the third person in the room, even though we were broadcasting to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people for each broadcast. So just make sure that you're cognizant. And it's hard for people because they think, how can I interact with a machine? But you practice it and you do it over time. And then you understand that it really is important that you communicate right with that person, right there, that third person, which could be the 30 other people who are also on your Zoom call. I also tell people to be really cognizant of lighting. So I just bought myself an LED light. I don't really need to use that now during the day because I have a lot of natural light in this room, which I'll get to in a second, but there's lots of Zoom meetings that go on in the evening. And so you want to make sure that you have nice, soft, diffused light. This LED light, and there's tons of them that you can get all over the internet, but see how bright this is? Boom, it goes on. And then I can make it a lot brighter. I can make it a lot softer. Oops, turn that back on. I can make it softer. I can also change the tone of it, and so when you turn that back on you, you can see that you can get a nicer tone on your skin. And it's really good if you happen to be in a dark room. So you might want to learn how to master one of these. That's a really good idea. I also tell people that they should, let me show you, make sure that you have all soft light coming onto your face. So for example, if I moved in closer and we went this way, look at how backlit that is. So it takes away from you listening to what I'm saying or watching me. You're just focused on, oh my gosh, look at all that light that's behind you. So you want to make sure that the lighting on your face is coming from the front and that it's soft and diffused. If I came too close like this, then I get into light coming up from the skylight in this room. So you always have to make sure that you're really good about the lighting. The other thing that I tell people, and I'm standing for this interview because it actually makes it look the best in terms of this background, but I tell people if you're sitting, also make sure that you're in a chair that is the opposite of the colors that you're wearing. So for example, I have a comfy chair here, which is a black chair, but a comfy computer chair. But if I sit in this chair and do the Zoom meeting, look at how I just kind of fade into the background. So you want to make sure that whatever you're doing puts you in the most prominent light. Because if you have something really important to say, and hopefully you're making a good contribution in these meetings, you want people really to pay attention to you and the message and not be distracted by what's going on behind you.
How can people unfamiliar with these online platforms or people who are not adept with technology be most effective in professional situations like business meetings or online interviews?
Well, I think you have to become an expert. You really need to do your research. There's a tremendous amount of tutorials out there. You know, check out the different platforms. Check out Zoom. Check out Skype for business. Check out Microsoft Teams. Check out WebEx and see how they are. Do it with your friends. I have a Monday meeting with all of my friends when at the height of all the COVID, you know, we couldn't get together. So we decided, oh, let's try the Zoom meeting. And I will say, there was all kinds of, you know, fits and starts along the way, but the more you become familiar with something, then the calmer you actually become as you are delivering the message. So you really just have to do your research. I will say this, you and I practiced this a couple of times, and the last time I was sitting down in a chair. And what happened when I was sitting down was, this line was cutting off my head. And when we looked at the playback, I thought, that actually doesn't look good. Should actually be standing up for this interview. So you learn as you go. And the good thing is that everybody's learning at the same time. So you all have a sympathetic audience.
You've been offering media training for several years. What are some aspects covered in your media training that you think translate particularly well to what's going on right now?
Well, I think the messaging should always be very clear. It should be concise, it should be open, it should be honest, it should be transparent. Particularly in unsettling times like these, people don't want to be given the runaround. They want to know exactly where you stand. They want you to be open, honest, transparent. As far as media training is concerned, I always tell people that we speak in phrases. The majority of our sentences are 5 words or less, and the majority of our words are 1 syllable. So as I just said, we speak in phrases, 4 words. There was only 1 2-syllable word in that sentence, that phrase actually. And I think that the more clear and concise your message can be, and the more conversational, the more you will be able to relate to your audience. In terms of talking about COVID, I read this article in the Harvard Business Review, and what is written in copy is very different than the way you would say something to someone. And I think what may be written in a story, yes, that's great for that particular style, but it doesn't translate into you when you're actually talking to someone. So for example, with regard to COVID, they were talking about Governor Cuomo in New York, who had been doing all of these daily briefings, and he was, imploring people to wear a mask, wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart, stay home, save lives. And they said, and I'm quoting this message, if Cuomo had tried to come off at what many consider professional, his message might have sounded something like this: for the preservation of public health and safety, I hereby order all residents not engage in essential activities that impact critical infrastructure to remain in their residences in order to mitigate the propagation of the coronavirus and to minimize morbidity and mortality. He understood when he was speaking during his daily briefings that it was much more impactful for him to speak to the audience in a conversational tone. Wear a mask, wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart, stay home, save lives. Also, I tell the folks who are doing media training to pause after person, place, or thing. It's very easy for us to kind of do run-on sentences, but actually when you pause, the audience understands that probably what you're saying next has some significance. So, for example, I'll give you one example. Let's say that the sentence is 10 people are standing in a driveway. They're looking up at the hospital, at the window, where their 75-year-old grandfather is now waving to them for the first time after battling COVID for a month. If I just said that 10 people were in the parking lot looking up at their 75-year-old grandpa, waving to him because he had just started waving after battling COVID for a month. It doesn't have as much impact as if I say there were 10 people. So I'm pausing after person, place, or thing. 10 people standing in a parking lot, looking up at the window, 3 stories up. In that window, their 75-year-old grandfather, who was waving to them for the first time in a month after having battled COVID. You pause after person, place, or thing. It allows the audience to move along with you. The other thing I tell people is to try and use pauses as opposed to what I call the like you knows. People say like you know a lot. I'm sure I've said this during this interview. It's actually our way of it's a brain spacer. It's letting our brains figure out what are we going to say next. And so if you can really kind of attune yourself to when you say like you know, and in that instance just pause, people will then think what is coming up next is of importance. I also tell people when they're speaking on these meetings to make sure that what you wear is not a distraction. Always wear solid colors and wear medium and bright colors because light colors actually tend to wash you out on the television, on the computer screen. And so blue is a fabulous color, red is great, green, purple, turquoise, bright, pink. We were always told on television to not wear yellow. For some reason, yellow is uncomfortable for people. They can't tell you why, but they actually switch the channel. So I never wear yellow. Also, don't wear pale colors. It tends to wash out the skin tone. So as I said, I'm wearing colors that are kind of opposite of what my hair tone is. It's a bright blue next to a dark black, but it is all a solid color. I tell people not to wear patterns because patterns tend to be distracting. And once again, you want to make sure that the audience is focused on you and what you have to say to them.
Susan, in parting, do you have any stories that you could share with us from your broadcast days?
Oh, there are so many stories. 2 actually come to mind, both of them when I was working in Miami. One was when Pope John Paul II came to visit, and he was conducting a huge outdoor mass at Tamiami Park, and there were hundreds of thousands of people who had come to listen to him. We were all broadcasting on the air for hours that day, chronicling the Pope's visit through Miami. And just before he starts to give the mass, the producer says in our ear, and nobody else can hear this, but they say, there is a plane that has entered into restricted airspace just south of the park, and it is heading north towards the mass area. And in that split second, as I'm continuing to talk about the record-setting crowd that's out there, I'm thinking in my mind, okay, 2 things have happened here. Either 1, this is a pilot who has lost his way, or 2, we might have a suicide bomber who is trying to come right in and crash this plane in the middle of the mass. And I thought in my head, what do we do? So I've always believed that it's important to be right, not first. And I also understand that credibility is king. And if we had gone on the air and said right away what was happening, we could have actually prompted a stampede of people trying to flee the park and get out of the way of this pilot. Or we could pause for a couple of minutes and trust our sources and to see if they would, if the military aircraft would be summoned into the airspace to connect with this pilot and move this person off of this particular path. And so we paused and we thought that's probably what we should do. If we had gone on the air and said there is a pilot in restricted airspace heading for this, I'm sure that we probably would have caused panic, and we would have probably caused injury, maybe even death of people fleeing the scene. But we trusted our sources. We believed that they were credible. And we understood that the military was scrambling jets into the area. They did make contact with this pilot. Yes, it was somebody who had lost their way. They maneuvered him out of restricted airspace and continued on with the mass. I think that that's something that you can really leverage to pretty much any business. Trust your sources. Make sure that you're right, not first. And credibility is king. You lose your credibility, it is very, very hard to come back from that. The other story had to do with, I worked for NBC in Miami for Channel 4, and every couple of months we did something called 4 Wishes. People would write in their wishes, and we would look through all of them, and then we would grant a couple of them each month. And one of the wishes came from a woman in Fort Lauderdale, and she had had a pen pal in England from kindergarten. And they had never spoken on the phone. They had never met in person. They had chronicled their lives on paper for decades, growing up, marriages, sickness, death, divorce, illness. And the woman in Fort Lauderdale now knew that the woman in England was not well. And she thought, I will probably never ever get to meet her in person. And so we took the woman from Fort Lauderdale and we took her to Bristol, England to meet her lifelong pen pal. And I'll never forget it. We came into her very modest flat and we had our TV camera set up. And as the woman from Fort Lauderdale rang the doorbell, you could see a lifetime of memories flooding her face. And the door opened and there was her friend Dulcie, and she could barely walk. She was on a walker. And the two of them just looked at each other. And they gave each other the longest hug, and they laughed and they smiled, and they were just so, overjoyed with the moment. And then we went inside with them and we interviewed them and listened to them for an hour before we finally left and let the two women be together. The next day we came back and the whole neighborhood threw a party for the woman from Fort Lauderdale. And we came back and aired the story. And several months later, we had heard that Dulcie had passed away. And in that moment, I thought, in television news, we have to cover so many things that are so tragic because that's what makes news. It's stuff that's extraordinary. And usually the extraordinary stuff is stuff that is not good. But I thought in that moment, the power of television to be able to communicate something inspiring and uplifting and to talk about compassion and love and commitment. And I thought, what a wonderful way to be able to kind of pay that forward as well.
Susan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
For more information about booking Susan as a keynote speaker for your event or to book her for media training sessions, please visit her website at susantaylor.biz or ours at siegelspeakers.com.